good afternoon / appropriate greetings for the time of day, wherever you may happen to be. My name is Mary Elizabeth Iturralde, and I'm with Creating Conversations Bookstore in Redondo Beach. And we are delighted as the pandemic mostly wanes and the world opens back up to be able to bring you some exciting new options to take out into the world with you and read. This afternoon, we are celebrating Regency Romance, and we are delighted to have We Are Bookish, NetGalley's member resource executive editor, Kelly Gallucci here, and she will be in conversation with our authors. And so I'm going to hand over the event to Kelly, and she will let you all know how we will proceed and how to ask questions. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Mary Elizabeth. Thank you to everyone for coming out to join us today for an afternoon of Regency Romance. I am thrilled to be chatting with these incredible authors. I have a ton of questions for them. I'm sure you all do as well. So as you think of questions, feel free to pop them in the Q&A box, and we will get to them in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the panel. I'm going to start us off by just introducing each of our authors and then asking them to share a sentence or two about their newest or upcoming release, and then we can dive right into all of the romance fun. So first up, we have Bethany Bennett, who grew up in a small fishing village in Alaska, where required learning included life skills like cold water survival, along with several other subjects that are utterly useless as a romance writer. Eventually settling in the Northwest with her real-life hero and 2 children, she enjoys mountain views from the comfort of her sofa, wearing a tremendous amount of flannel and drinking more coffee than her doctor deems wise. Bethany, can you tell us about your book, West End Earl?
Certainly. This is a girl in pants trope and friends to lovers, and it was an absolute blast to write. I'm thoroughly in love with Cal and Fee at this point, and it publishes on Tuesday, the 29th.
Thank you. Next up, we have Christina Britton, who developed a passion for writing romance novels shortly after buying her first at the tender age of 13. Though for several years she put brush instead of pen to paper, she has returned to her first love and is now writing full-time. She spends her days dreaming of corsets and cravats and noblemen with tortured souls. She lives with her husband and 2 children in the San Francisco Bay Area. Christina, can you tell us about A Duke Worth Fighting For?
Sure. It's book 3 in the Isle of Sin series, and it comes out about 2 months on August 24th. And it centers around Marjorie, who is a widow whose husband was killed at Waterloo, and she's being blackmailed. Somebody's saying that her husband deserted. So she has to find the money to pay this blackmailer, and she winds up meeting Daniel, who is a scarred war hero, scarred inside and out, and he needs help finding a wife. So she kind of exchanges services, help him find a wife in order to get the money to pay off this blackmailer. And in the meantime, they wind up kind of connecting and falling in love when they didn't expect to fall in love.
Love a match. Next up, we have Amalie Howard, a USA Today and Publishers Weekly bestselling author of The Beast of Bestwick, a smart, sexy, deliciously feminist romance, and one of Oprah Magazine's top 24 best historicals to read. She is the co-author of the #1 bestsellers in Regency Romance and Scottish Historical Romance, My Rogue, My Ruin, and What a Scot Wants, and has also penned several critically acclaimed young adult novels. Of West Indian multiracial descent, her articles on multicultural fiction have appeared in the Portland Book Review and on diversity in YA. She currently lives in Colorado with her husband and 3 children. Amalie, can you tell us about the Princess Stakes?
First of all, I wear flannel too. My bio doesn't sound as fun as you guys. That's awesome. So the Princess Stakes comes out on Tuesday. It's about a biracial Indian princess who is trying to escape an assassin and ends up on the ship of the boy she once loved and spurned, only he is now a duke. There's lots of angst and enemies to lovers and just one cabin.
Nice.
Next up, we have Samara Parish, who has been escaping into fictional worlds since she was a child. When she picked up her first historical romance book, she found a fantasy universe she never wanted to leave and the inspiration to write her own stories. She lives in Australia with her own hero and their many fur babies in a house with an obscenely large garden, despite historically being unable to keep a cactus alive. How to Survive a Scandal is her debut novel. Samara, can you tell us about How to Survive a Scandal?
How to Survive a Scandal is a story of a young lady who was raised to be a duke. She's engaged to a duke, and then due to an unfortunate set of circumstances, ends up married to a mere mister out in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of like a reverse Cinderella. So instead of going from scrubs to silk, she's going the other way around and has to hand everything back over and start doing chores. It's a marriage of convenience trope. It's kind of enemies to lovers. They certainly don't like each other at first, and it's just very much fish out of water.
Thank you. And finally, we have Kate Pembrooke, a lifelong reader whose path to becoming an author of Regency Romance was forged when she first read Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. Kate lives with her family in the Midwest, and she loves puttering amongst her flower beds, taking beach vacations, and adding to her already extensive collection of cookbooks. Kate, can you tell us about Not the Kind of Earl You Married?
Sure. Well, first off, let me say that it is my homage to my all-time favorite trope, fake engagement / fake relationship. So there is a fake betrothal between my hero and heroine. And I really love the line that Forever came up with. The one woman in London who doesn't want to marry him is now his fiance. And that pretty much sums up the book. I wish I'd had it when I was pitching this book before I had my book contract. I'm like, man, why didn't I think of that? But yeah, I had a blast writing these characters, kind of like Bethany said, you know, they become your friends and they were just incredibly fun to write. It comes out July 27th, so another month, and I'm really excited.
I love it. Thank you, everyone. All right, so I figured the best place to start, right, is the subgenre that connects you all, that brings us here today, Regency. So why the Regency period? What draws you there as a writer? Bethany, you want to kick us off?
I think for me, it's because I think that's where I imprinted early. My first romance ever was a Regency, and I was only in 4th grade. And so at the time, it kind of like blew my mind that, you know, that you had carriages and horses and cravats and ball gowns and, you know, and this society that was so very structured. And so I really do think I just sort of imprinted on it early. And so when I did start pursuing writing as an actual, like, I'm not just going to say I want to write, I'm actually going to start doing it now. In my mind, there was no other option. It was going to be a Regency historical.
Samara, what about you?
Oh, again, Regency was the first novel I picked up. It was a Julia Quinn novel, The Viscount Who Loved Me, and oh my God, I was just so in love. I was going through a really dark time actually, and I credit Regency romance novels for literally transporting me from, you know, not so much fun time to this completely different world. And I think that's what I really like about it. It's the full escapism. There's nothing in there like that. You know how sometimes you're reading a book and it'll mention something and it'll trigger off something that you have to do. And it's like, oh yeah, they mentioned coffee. Oh my goodness, I need to go clean the coffee machine. You don't have any of that with Regency. Like there's no triggers in there that's going to make you go back into your real world. So I find it's probably the easiest way for me just to, you know, escape all the things that you have, like work and, you know, life and all of that sort of stuff. Regency is the best, I think, to get away from that.
Which I think we've needed so much of in this last year, a place that we can feel, I think, comforted and happy and find these joys and happily ever afters. But Kate, Christina, Amalie, anything to add?
I'll go ahead and go. To me, the Regency is just like elegance and refinement, but it also has this naughtiness to it. Like, you know, it's a time period of contradictions. So you have all of these proper, you know, the virgin debutante and all this stuff and all the rules that she has to follow. But then there's also this other side with, you know, the widows who get to have their affairs, and then there's the gambling hells. And so there's like this whole plethora of different types of, I don't even know how to describe it, you know, just different types of feels that you can get from this one time period. And I just love that about it, that it can just swing from one to the other.
I think for me, it was because also it was the most familiar as well. But the biggest draw, I think, is writing when, you know, women in the period were so limited. They were considered property, you know, didn't really have kind of lives of their own. So you're writing, you're taking modern feminine agency and applying it to their goals and to them. And for me, that's the draw. That's one of the biggest draws, like because we're writing for modern readers in an historical context. So I enjoyed doing that.
I kind of jump on that too. It's all the societal strictures that women endured, and just that interplay, and trying to give them their happily ever after within those, you know, cultural norms of the time. I just am fascinated by it.
Fist bump.
I mean, you've all already mentioned, you know, like books that you're inspired by, like, you know, Jane Austen, obviously, Julia Quinn. What are your expectations as a reader when you go into a historical romance, and does that impact the way that you write it yourself, or are the things that you're looking for as a reader actually very different than what you end up writing? Kate, you want to start us off for this one?
I mean, I read fiction, whether it's historical romance or really any other type of fiction, for entertainment and escapism mainly. And so that's what I'm looking for. So I want to escape. I want to have fun. I want to be entertained for those 4 to 6 hours, however long it takes me to read it. And that's what I really try to deliver with my books. That's one of my overarching goals, is to entertain the people that have taken the time to pick up a book I've written.
Let's go, Christina.
Yeah, definitely escapism is a huge part. And then I really, really love like deep emotional connection, really like a lot of heart. And then also one of the things I love to look for is humor. I love humor when I'm reading a historical romance. And I try to put a little bit of it into my books where I can. But yeah, that's one of my favorite things. But yeah, like Kate was saying, escapism is a huge part of it. You step into this other world and it's amazing.
I like really badass heroes, you know, and heroines. I like I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most. So I read a lot of historical romance. It's most of my shelf, but I also read a lot of, you know, YA fantasy and other sort of stuff. And, you know, and I actually feel like they tend to cross over a lot, not in terms of the content, but just in terms of, you know, the energy of them. I think that both YA fantasy and historical romance, they're really fast paced. They're really intriguing. They're the kind of thing that I stay up way too late reading, because, and they have really strong heroines, and there's quite a lot of, I like a lot of action in my books. I'm not a huge fan of you know, romances that just have a lot of sitting around and talking and feeling. I do like feelings. Feelings are good, obviously, but I like something that has lots of action in it.
I think I'm definitely team humor. You know, I think that, you know, when we talk about the books that have inspired us, for me, just personally, I found tremendous comfort in, you know, Eloisa James's work. But I think that then as a writer trying to kind of find, you know, you sort of have an idea of what your voice sounds like, and trying to see if there's room for you with your voice, right? And so I think for me, I sort of breathed a sigh of relief when I started reading Tessa Dare, because Tessa Dare is hysterical, and her books and her style, I think, really gave me permission to, as a writer, to go ahead and be like, no, I can be funny. I can use, I mean, I never deliberately use an anachronistic word, but I do know that like the pacing of the dialogue is very modern for me. But that's kind of what I found in Tessa Dare's work. And so I think that there's a lot of inspiration there, that it gives you the modern bent on humor, and the way that she handled dialogue, I think, really gave me permission to handle dialogue in a way where that I felt comfortable, which was, I get pinged sometimes for being too modern, but but that's what I'm looking for when I want to escape, and when I want that, I want to be entertained, and so yeah, if you want Austen, don't read me, but I think that's what I'm really looking for. Is I'm looking for the humor to just take me away in pure entertainment.
Yeah, it's interesting because I read this really interesting sort of thread about somebody was calling it wallpaper historical, somebody else was calling it dress ups, and I kind of feel like there are two different genres that people don't realize are two different genres of historical romance. There's the historical romance that has a lot of history and and is really going for those readers who love the history aspect of it. And then there's the historical romance that I think is less about that and does have I don't know, maybe it's pacier, I'm not sure, because of things like the way that the dialogue is structured. So I find it really interesting when I see those threads pop up, because it's almost like everyone's expecting there to be a one type of historical romance, when there's actually different types. Every author writes their own different thing, and there's enough readers out there to write what you love. There's enough. You're going to find readers who love what you do. You're going to find readers that hate what you do. But there's I just find it interesting that there's different types of historical romance, and it's all right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the beauty of it is that there's, especially in romance, there's something for everyone. And that, in historical romance is also true. Like what Samara said is absolutely right. You have like Kathleen E. Woodiwiss or Woodiwiss? I always pronounce that wrong. But her to Tessa Dare, and I mean, Tessa Dare's laugh out loud funny. So for me, like as a historical romance reader, I love the banter. I love the heart. I love the hero and the heroine, going at it with, verbal words and then with physical actions following up later, because that's always sexy. And as far as what I write, I mean, I do look for some historical accuracy. I'm going to hide my face, but etymology.com is kind of my buddy, because I hate being called out by people saying this did not exist before 1815. You are wrong. So I'm always careful to just check those points and make sure that, plastic wasn't around in the Regency. Just kidding. But I do look for stuff like that. But I also agree with Bethany, in that sometimes with the anachronisms, you just want to read for the escapism, and the anachronisms actually bring a different sort of flavor to it, I think, because I also use not words, but the actual how you put them together might seem anachronistic when it's not. You don't know that those people in the 1800s didn't speak like that. Were you there? I'm kidding.
Yeah, I find even words like ramshackle, the word ramshackle, I've been pinged on that one, and I'm like, oh, okay, I wouldn't even have thought to have checked that word, because it feels like it's a word that should have been around for a long time. But so yeah, sometimes it's even hard to know. Like there are the things that I know that I need to look at, and then there are the things that I just assume and you don't even know, you don't think to check up those words. So
apparently, I use scrappy and scrapper in the book that's coming out this Tuesday, and apparently that's not a word that was actually in use in that context during that time. That's actually too early. Didn't know that. No one caught that. I can tell you though, like shenanigans, not a Regency word.
Oh,
you think it should be? It should.
Did you know that Sarah McLean said that shiro existed? Who knew? Shiro is an old word.
I do feel like, and I'm not sure what kind of readers, just in case there's young ears, I'm going to spell it, but DILDO.
Forever ago.
16th century, people.
Yep.
16th century. In that context, 16th century. And I'm going to be making multiple posts when my third book is coming out. I'm like, yes, this is a word that was existed in that time.
I can use that, but I can't use the word scrappy. I'm going to try and get away with it anyway.
Trying to use scrappy.
Madeline's watching.
This sort of nicely goes into my next question, which is specifically for Amalie and Christina, though anyone can feel free to jump in. You both have a pretty extensive backlist. You published numerous historical romances. How have you personally seen the genre evolve since you started writing, and how do you feel like you've changed as writers yourselves since those early books?
I think that definitely inclusivity, as far as race, sexuality, gender, age, religion. I think that people are much more aware and veering this genre in the right direction and making it open for more people, which is wonderful. Also, the issue of consent, which, you know, came about with, was brought to light. It didn't come about, but it was brought to light more with the whole Me Too movement. Because I noticed that in my first book, with Love in Sight, that I have a scene that makes me cringe now, where the hero actually grabs the heroine and kisses her without her consent. And he's trying to convince her of something. And now I'm like, no, I would never write something like that. So even in the 3 years since that's come out, that is incredibly important to me. And yeah, I wouldn't write a scene like that. So just in that small amount of time.
Romance.
What's that? I'm sorry, I missed that.
I was saying romance moves so quickly that as a genre, it's constantly reacting to what's happening in our modern world. And I feel like when I, read books from a handful of years ago, you can tell a really distinct difference between ones written in, 2015 versus ones written last year.
Yeah, in just a small amount of time. I mean, when you think of the changes in romance, you think of the bodice rippers back in the 80s and things like that, where, unfortunately, the R word was a very, common thing in those. And now, no, you would never, ever touch that with a 10-foot pole. So, yeah, but you're right. And just in the last couple of years, it's done a really big shift, which is incredible and wonderful.
Amalie, what about you? How have you seen the genre change, or how have you changed as a writer?
Yeah, I mean, I cut my teeth on Judith McNaught, Jude Devereaux, Julie Garwood, and those are all like writers from like the 1980s. And as Christina said, a lot of those themes and tropes and stuff that were written about were quite problematic. I mean, the genre is always going to evolve to kind of follow what's being discussed sort of like in modern timelines, and that's always, as you said, Kelly, always going to shift. I agree, there's more feminism, there's more consent, different types of heroes, different types of heroines, whether they're more character driven in terms of like who they are from an identity perspective. There's also more of a a BIPOC narrative. Historical accounts usually skew to default, which is white cis het. But we're seeing that people of color existed, right? People like Sophia Duleep-Singh, who was my sort of guidelines for the Princess Stakes. She was an actual Sikh princess during the Victorian era, and she was Queen Victoria's goddaughter, and she experienced a lot of racism and prejudice in the court, even though she was a princess. She went on to become a suffragette later on, but I was so inspired by her because she was a real person of color who lived in those times. So I'm hopeful that more stories, especially in historical romance, will come to the forefront, and people will start writing more diverse narratives. We'll have a lot more stories from around the world, with different sort of narratives. That's what I'm looking forward to the most.
Definitely. I know Adriana Herrera is working on it.
Oh gosh, I
Paris.
can't wait for that. Liana De La Rosa, she's coming out with something that's diverse as well. Yeah, I'm super excited.
Awesome. All right, so now I want to look to our newer authors, Samara and Kate. You're both debut novelists. Bethany, this is your second book in your own journeys from this idea conception to publication. What is the most helpful writing advice you've received, and what is the least helpful?
I think the most helpful piece of writing was to find your people. And I think that that's such an extraordinarily important part of the writer journey is to find other writers who you connect with and you gel with, because this is an ups and downs, swings and roundabouts kind of profession, and a good writing partner, a good writing group will make that feel like fun, regardless of where you are in that journey. They'll make you feel it fun. They inspire you. They help you brainstorm. They help you critique. They're some place to vent, but they're also, your biggest advocates. When I got a call from my agent about, with the offer, I called my writing partners before I called my husband. He was out doing the grocery shopping, and I'm just like, oh my goodness. And it was my writing group. They were the first people that I called. And actually a group of women on this Zoom call are the first people I called last week when I had some, different news. So that's my recommendation, is find your people.
I think too, early on, someone told me that persistence is as important as talent. You can be incredibly talented, but very few people just dash off a novel and sell it. It's a process, and we have to learn the craft of writing, and that takes a great deal of persistence. Some days when it's hard to write, it's not fun to sit at your computer and stare at that page and you've written 50 words and you really wanted to write 1,000. So that was very helpful. I think the least helpful is when people try to give you these what should be guidelines, for example, like only use he said and she said, but they tell you this piece of advice as if it's some sort of writing edict that you must never, ever cross. I mean, you must obey this rule at all times. And I think that's very unhelpful, because we all have inner critics and they love to sit there and shout these rules at us. And so I think that's really unhelpful when people are a little dogmatic about some things.
Bethany, do you have anything to add?
I think that probably the most useful thing was I definitely get to piggyback on the idea of finding your people, having that support structure around you, because you do have to be persistent. It's not going to just magically happen overnight. And even the wild success stories you hear about, they didn't just like speak into existence some book and then magically make an agent appear. And then, there's still a process. There's still a project. No matter how long you have been on your particular journey to publication, there's still a process that has to happen. And so that persistence and having your people to support you and to be there when you are just, my writing group, my critique group is phenomenal. I was upset over getting rejected by an agent once. And so they all, as a whole, like almost every one of them, they all dashed off really crappy query letters to the same agent so that we could all be rejected by the same agent. Find your people. It is vital. Find your people. And so but as far as, and also, I don't know, basically just repeating what was said, but those people that they say their opinions on writing and craft, and they speak it as if it's just fact and truth and non-negotiable. And they say like the road to hell is paved with adverbs. I like adverbs. I think you have to use them in
adverbs too.
I like adverbs. They're there for a reason. Give me those ly words. I like adverbs. So yes, you get those people that just they speak things as if they're hardcore truths, and there's like you have to adapt to it. But for me, honestly, on top of all of that, it was the willingness to revise, being open to revisions, being open to not looking at your story as this precious thing that that this is my precious baby and no one can touch it but me because it's perfect as it is. You can't do that. If you're going to be trying to publish and provide something, you can't necessarily think of it as this perfect piece of art that you have created on your own. That's just my opinion, but yeah.
Good advice. So Bethany and Samara, you both have kind of touched on this a little bit. I would love to hear more and love to hear more from the rest of the group about the historical romance author or book maybe that has had the biggest impact on your writing? Kate, do you want to kick us off here?
I'm sure. So kind of to touch back on what some of the others said earlier, humor is a big draw for them. And that is a huge draw for me as well. And as we talked earlier, Tessa Dare's books are just hysterically funny. And so I love her. And Julia Quinn also. I mean, I always know that I'm going to laugh, smile, and be emotionally satisfied when I read books by those two ladies. So they were a huge source of inspiration for me when I sat down and tried to write my own book. And hopefully I bring some of those qualities to the page.
Yeah, I mean, I find, I think we're the same. Jess Dare, Julia Quinn, Suzanne Enoch. You know, there's a lot that have. There's a lot that just have such an incredibly amazing tone and humor to it. I think in a very small scale at the moment, it's the Bare Knuckle Bastards series by Sarah MacLean. And it's the way that she is writing her villain at the moment. And I have a villain that I'm writing. So I'm trying to get somewhere near the amazingness she does with writing that villain and writing that character journey over the space of a few books. So specifically, yeah, that's probably one that's currently impacting me.
So
For me,
my
it
first.
was, go ahead, Amelia.
There you go. Oh yeah. So my first was Whitney, My Love. I think I was like 12. I was very, very young. Probably shouldn't have been reading that book, but I was. I love Judith McNaught. I've read all her books. My copy of Whitney, My Love, the spine, you can't even read it because it's been read so many times. I was going to get it and I forgot. It's up in my library. And then in terms of like stylistic, if we're kind of talking about that as well, it's Lisa Kleypas. I will read anything that woman writes. She writes a phone book, I'll read it.
For me, Amanda Quick was the one that introduced me to the Regency time period and made it like stick for me. It's like, this is it. I'm not going anywhere else. And then I found Julia Quinn and it was just like, oh, you know, with the humor and the witty dialogue and just, I loved everything about it. The very first book though, that's the most important to me is the very first one I picked up. I was 13 years old. I was at a Walden Books at the mall and I just saw this gorgeous cover and the book was Under Gypsy Skies by Catherine Kramer. Gorgeous. And I was 13 and I read this thing in a single night, seriously. So years later when I started to write in earnest and I had my website and I had the story and the picture about it up on my website, she saw it and she contacted me. And we've been like pen pals ever since. We've become friends. So now every time I think about it, I get chills, right? So 13-year-old me standing in that bookstore, looking at that book and everything changes. And now I'm friends with the author of the book that, you know, it just kind of blows my mind every time I think about it.
That's very cool. Bethany, what about you?
Well, I can tell you, I was in 4th grade and my first was An Early Engagement by Barbara Metzger. And like I said, you know, earlier, like it was this complete revelation that this world existed. And I was in 4th grade. So it's not like I had necessarily been exposed to the concept of, you know, the Regency of England, you know, those particular years, what was going on and all of like, I didn't know any of the history. It was just this like whole new world opened up and I just couldn't get enough of it. And so I think that definitely those hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of books, because I used to just go through and I came from a very conservative home. And so my mom had opinions on what I was reading. And so I was only allowed to read like very low heat, chaste kind of books, which is understandable. I was in 4th grade. I mean, really. Really. And so what I would do is I knew which imprints I could read. So I didn't actually follow specific authors or trilogies or whatever. I just took my babysitting money, or, you know, Typhoons would sweep through, because we were living on Guam at the time. We were a military family. And so like, you know, Typhoons would sweep through and just wrecked yards everywhere, and I would go and clean it up for money, and I would take all of that money to the used bookstore, and I would just have a box, and I would just go through, start at the A's, and I would just tick. And if it was Fawcett, if it was Signet, if it was like, it was just like, I would just go through until my box was full, and I would just clean out entire shelves. And so I think that all of that reading in my early years, definitely.
I used to do that at Goodwill. I would go to Goodwill and just buy every single historical romance I could find. Yeah.
Didn't matter what it was about, didn't matter who it was by. It was like, these are my people. And you just put them into your bag and take them home.
When I first started reading historical romance, it was a secondhand bookstore, and it had this sort of like bakery next to it. And so I was going in, and like you, it was just like this whole world, because a lot of the bookstores weren't carrying. So I don't know how the secondhand bookstore was even getting all of these historical romance novels, because there just weren't that many in like normal bookstores. And I have a soft spot in my heart for that particular secondhand bookstore, because that was my life for years. It was good.
Love it. So Bethany, you just brought up the steamy times, which I want to talk about a little bit. Sex scenes obviously bring the heat in romance, but they serve such an important role. They further character development and plot. They offer these great opportunities for like vulnerability and honesty. So how does the Regency setting impact the way that you're writing those scenes? And are the scenes always driven by your characters, or does the trope that you're writing ever have an impact on the way you write those scenes?
I think that no matter what, you're going to be, you are going to have some impact from your tropes, just because that's going to drive everything. But and there are some times that, yes, it's there's kind of like this debate, I think, where it's like sometimes that it's okay to have just sexy times for the sake of sexy times, and sometimes, and then there are the hardcore that are like, it has to serve a purpose no matter what. And I think I kind of fall somewhere in the middle. Like I try to make sure that there's something going on emotionally, mentally, whatever, with character, that this is changing them, that this is somehow really actually changing their relationship. And so, and I think that's probably one of the great things about romance is really we're capturing this couple in their falling in love period. It's not like when they've been married for 20 years and it's Friday night and he said he's frisky, so okay, let's do this thing. Like you get this where all of this is really in those early stages, in those early days of the relationship. I really do think that they should be changing and growing and actively becoming one unit, becoming a couple. And so for me, they have a tendency to be very character driven, but I do know that I can look back on the ones that I've written so far, and like the one that I have in edits right now, and I try to make it so that scene couldn't have happened in another book. Like it couldn't have happened with just insert a different name and a different person. I really try to make it specific to this character. So maybe as I'm verbally processing it through, I think I'm more character driven. But those characters are, kind of in my mind, they're very tied to certain tropes. And so, Cal and Fee, I'm thinking of one particular scene that if you're one of those people that just skips those scenes entirely, if you skip this particular scene, you're going to be completely, totally lost. There's that scene towards the end when she goes her own direction. Like if you skip that scene, you're going to go the next, you're just going to be like, it's just whatever. And then you go and you're like, wait a second, I missed something important,
The whole plot turns. Yeah.
Yeah, completely.
Yeah, it's interesting that you're talking about that way. Like I'm not somebody who likes to do things that I'm not good at. There's just some kind of, it's just a personality trait that I'm working on. And so I didn't feel comfortable that I was good enough at sex scenes. So in book 2, it was like writing, it's that sex scene here, writing, and then right at the very, it was like literally like I'm about to send it off. I don't have a choice. I have to write this. And you can tell in my reviews that was my attitude towards them, because there's so much going, I love this book. I love this book. Oh, but the closed door sex scene, like really? And, I had so many people that like, really enjoyed the story, but then really just went, okay, it's lacking something. And so with book 2, I listened to those reviews and I'm like, okay, let's do this. And, I got it. Like, I actually, I switched point of view. I wrote it from his point of view, and there was something in there that just made his decisions around the relationship and why he felt like he did about the heroine and all of this sort of stuff. It all just came together in this one sex scene. And I'm like, oh, that's what the reviewers are talking about when they're saying that they're actually missing this bit. Because I don't know. I didn't get that until I didn't understand it until book 2. So book 1's still worth reading though. Read it. It's still a good book. It just book 2 is where I've evolved as a writer. So.
Yeah, the sex scenes definitely have to be an important part of the storyline. For me, my books are really character driven. I really focus on the emotional aspect of it. And if something doesn't work out or I'm going in the wrong direction for a character, I immediately like the brakes go on and I can't go any further. So I kind of have to backtrack and make sure that I'm going in the right direction. So, it depends on the character. In this next book, in A Dirk Worth Fighting For, it's my first widow. So, and funny enough, the hero is a virgin. So it was a lot of fun to write. Yay, virgin heroes. So it was like a lot of fun having the heroine be, the one who has the, she knows what she's doing, and she had fun doing it before. So, so she's teaching him, and I had a lot of fun doing that. But yeah, that's a big part of their relationship. So it definitely depends on the storyline.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the virgin hero. For me, I think, the intimacy has to be there. I always say that, I have like teenage children. I'd much prefer them to read one of my novels because the intimacy is layered in with the sex, as opposed to going and looking at something on TV or, on the internet that they might find, which I mean porn, but I don't know if I can say that. That's a good point.
I like that.
But, thank you. But, sometimes the characters, they're just going to bang, and you're going to write a scene and you might say, I want you in this garden. And they'll be like, no, we're going in this linen closet. And you're like, okay, we're in a linen closet right now. And there's skirts being held and, breeches being dropped and all this other stuff. So, it's very character driven. I feel like it has to be, like you guys all said, like layered into the story and impactful to the story, and it has to move the plot along. We all know the nuance of craft. But like, I don't like when there's gratuitous sex scenes. Like I find them boring. If I find them in books, I'll be like, I don't need this. I need to see it tied in on an intimate level, like, where it's all meshed and merged, but also, yes, they also still have to bang. I'm sorry that I'm saying that word so much. I apologize. Kate, please take it. Kate, go Kate.
Okay. I really agree with that. And I think that Amalie really hit the nail on the head, and Christina too, that there has to be that emotional intimacy. It has to exist. I'm not a big fan of just sex for sex either. I tend to flip through those pages pretty quickly. But I don't think any of these ladies do that. And I hope I don't either, so.
She said nail on the head, okay? I hope everybody on this panel heard that.
You're planting it in my mind with all this banging.
Right, we're at our 15-minute mark. So this is my reminder to our lovely audience that you can send questions in through the Q&A box, and I will ask our wonderful panelists. Nothing has come through yet, but I still have a lot of questions. So I'm going to continue with those as our audience sends them in. I did have a few individual questions for our authors inspired by their books. So Kate, actually, your book kicks off with some fantastic banter between hero and heroine. And I feel like you're really using it as like a tool of creating equality and like challenging the power dynamics between them. Can you talk about how you wrote that?
I wouldn't say that I consciously went into that scene thinking that, but that's how it played out. The hero, William, comes in and he creates a very poor first impression on the heroine, Charlotte. And she tells him what she thinks. I mean, she doesn't hold back, and she's blunt, and her impression is not a favorable one, right? So right there, I think that the playing field for those two in that regard is even. You know, in Regency society, so much was uneven between the power dynamics of men and women. And so I really love that interplay. I think I get a lot of that from Jane Austen. You know, I mentioned Pride and Prejudice earlier, and I feel like Darcy and Lizzie Bennet had a similar dynamic, particularly when he gives her that awful marriage proposal where he's insulting her as he's telling her he's fallen in love against his will, you know, and she just plainly says, no way, dude. And I love that scene. So I think, you know, something similar goes on. And then the banter kind of turns a little bit flirtier as time goes on and the attraction grows. And then that's fun too. So.
Samara, your hero also kind of has a rough start with the heroine, but something that I loved about him is that he's really grappling with his privilege while trying to help his community. Was this kind of always a part of his character, or was it something that developed as you were writing him?
I mean, Benedict developed very much as a response to Amelia. So when I was writing it, it was really her story and her journey that I was considering first, and then it was a case of how does Benedict complement that? How does Benedict, you know, highlight different aspects of it to sort of show the contrast between her and him, and then how does he have similar journeys to her? So it was really her story first, and I think that part of that is because since I'm 39 this year, and since I turned 30, like my 20s were all about finding the guy, you know, like finding the guy. And I used to love stories that were all about the hero's redemption. And then since I found the guy, and he's really sweet and I love him a lot and he's still asleep, I have focused more on my own self-growth. Like that's become more important to me than it has become to try and fix somebody else. So I think with Amelia, you know, that's and certainly with Fiona in the next book, it's really about me exploring me, and then having the hero complement the heroine and try and that's not to say that I'm exactly like Amelia. I took my worst parts of myself and amplified them a lot. I am, you know, so I have a little bit more self-awareness than she does. But yeah, that's so yeah. The hero was reflecting what we needed to for the heroine's journey.
And I mean, that search for identity is something we see often in romance. It's something, Bethany, that was so interesting about your book. Because the heroine is trying to find herself, but she's been disguised as her brother for years, like all of her formative years. So what were the challenges of writing a heroine who spent that long pretending to be someone else and now has to discover herself so much later than she typically would have?
Well, it was so much fun, honestly. I think because when you think about writing a Regency heroine, you kind of like, you have the box, right? Like, are they a debutante or are they a widow? And there's really like nothing in between. Like there's just, or is she a wallflower and she's now a spinster? I mean, like, yeah, there's and yet here's Ophelia. Fee is just like other. And so she has, I mean, so yes, she's a woman. She has been in hiding because of safety issues. And so there is a lot of this feeling where like she's very, very guarded. She doesn't let very many people in. She's actually really annoyed that Cal has managed to like wiggle in, you know, and that it just like bugs her in a lot of ways. And so but at the same time, her language is not that of a refined lady, you know, and so as she progresses through, she's trying to figure out, you know, realizing that she really doesn't fit. She doesn't know how to walk like a woman. She's like, well, I want to be able to, you know, wear pretty dresses and all that, but am I going to look like I'm playing dress up? Like, or am I actually going to look like a woman? Like, I'm comfortable in my own skin. And so really everything for Fee boiled down to her becoming comfortable in her own skin. And because she was coming at it from being, you know, in public and pretending for so long to be a man, she got to kind of pick and choose which aspects of femininity she was going to embrace. And I thought that was pretty neat, that she got to sort of pick and choose, you know, and so, but there was another big part for her was actually feeling safe enough to be a woman, safe enough to actually own her own skin. So for her, there was a lot of healing and a lot of recovery that had to happen in order for her to fully embrace what it meant to be a Regency woman. And even then, she only picked and choose. You know, she kind of like cherry picked who she was going to be. She really was in charge from the beginning of who she was going to be in this book. And I thought that was kind of fascinating versus who you were raised to be and then growing up into whatever. She was like, I'm an adult, now I have control, now I finally have safety, and now I get to figure out who am I.
Exactly. We had 2 questions come in from our audience. The first is actually for you, Bethany. Will Violet get her own book or novella? Violet was also a favorite of mine, so I'm curious about this answer.
You know, someone had asked me on Tessa Dare's Facebook page, actually, they had asked about like if when I'm making side characters, right? Normally when I'm making a side character, it is very much like there is a purpose for them. I have a plan for them. They're fully formed in my head. Violet was not. Like, she was in my mind when I was initially writing Violet. She's just going to go off and have her happy little world and whatever, it's fine. But now this isn't the first time I've been asked this question. And so I really think that Violet needs a novella. We need to see what happens to Violet. I would love to tell you that I have it all planned out and it's all right there and it's just waiting to, you know, splash onto the page. No, it's not. But I'm hoping, you know, if nothing else, I could always do a short story for like newsletter subscribers or something that's Violet's story. But I do think that that's something that's going to have to come because it's not the first time I've been asked this question.
All right, so we'll all subscribe to your newsletter. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, this next question comes from Sarah K. Sarah wants to know, what is a trope you have not written yet, but you really want to? Amalie, do you want to start us off?
Oh my God, I need to write Secret Baby so bad. I'm obsessed with Secret Baby. I will admit it. People are like, we hate Secret Baby. I'm like, I love Secret Baby.
Controversial.
I would like to write some Secret Baby tropes. I don't know. I've written enemies to lovers and friends to lovers and fake engagement, fake marriage, but yeah, no secret babies yet. I'm down for that.
We're there for it in the chat too.
And I'm gonna make them triplets just for drama.
I love it. Christina, what about you?
I think marriage of convenience. I actually have written one, but I don't know that it will ever see the light of day. It's one of those pre-published, I'm just kind of getting my feet wet type of thing. But I would love to write a marriage of convenience. Those are a lot of fun.
All right, Kate.
Runaway Bride.
Yeah.
I want to do a Runaway Bride.
That would be fun.
Yep.
I think that I'd like to do like a real enemies to lovers. Like, you know, they hated each other and then they're together. That would be something that I enjoy.
And I think maybe like a real marriage of convenience for me too. Like there's that element, you know, in the second book, but I don't want to give spoilers for people that haven't read it. But there's an element of marriage of convenience. But I really love the idea of actually having that be like the main trope involving the 2 main characters and like watch them fall in love. I think Samara did a beautiful job of it. And so it kind of like made that go, ooh, I wonder, you know, what would it be like to actually write that? So, but my first instinct is I want to do a Runaway Bride so bad.
That would be fun.
We have 3 minutes left, so let's see if we can get to these last individual author questions. Amalie, this one is for you. There's been so much interest in modern royals recently in the news, on social media, and people are very curious kind of, I think, about the role they play in society today and like the different pressures that they're under. Did any of this have an impact in the way that you wrote your heroine, who's a princess?
Yeah, I mean, totally. I mean, the fascination with modern royals is it's definitely like, especially all over the media, they're in the public eye. Every move is judged and measured, kind of like being an aristocrat in London, right? You know, with Harry and Meghan particularly, you know, they're in an interracial relationship. I've been in one for 20 years, and it's been tough. Like, you know, there's so much to unpack between the couple alone. I mean, cultural differences, racial differences, and all of that is being judged by everybody else. So you have my hero and heroine, Ristan and Sarani is a biracial Indian princess. She's Anglo-Indian. And she, you know, Bethany touched on it before, this like trying to fit into your own skin and figure out who you are. And she's trying to do that because she's straddling 2 different worlds. Now, I'm biracial, and I've also struggled with kind of figuring out who I was, where I fit in. Like, you know, a lot of stuff that I tried to, you know, in a romance novel, you don't want to unpack all of that on page. But I think if you didn't, it would be disingenuous to your readers. So I kind of had my heroine, Sarani, she's very vulnerable and she does handle all of it well. But I think what I really wanted her to do is handle it with grace and dignity. And sometimes that's hard to do, especially when you're being faced with racism. You know, but I think I kind of got there. I really love this couple. I love their journey in terms of, you know, falling in love with the person that you're meant to be with, no matter what they look like on the outside. And, you know, in terms of her being a royal, like, yeah, I mean, it was really cool that she outranked everybody. So like, I love that part of it, you know. It was also interesting to write from a, you know, a power and privilege perspective, despite her skin color being something that was looked at as lesser, you know, within the period.
Okay. I think we just hit our hour. So I want to say thank you to everyone who came to join us today. Thank you to Creating Conversations for hosting us, to all of our wonderful authors for coming and spending the afternoon chatting with me about Regency Romance. Yeah, just thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Mary Elizabeth, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, authors. I mean, this is the sort of thing where, you know, I could keep doing this all day, but also some of us have dogs that will not put up with it for much longer. So, so much appreciation, and thank you all again. And we look forward to seeing you again soon, and have a great time with all these books as part of your summer reading. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, lots of fun. Lots of fun.